Welcome to After the Breach podcast. This is episode 40. We're your hosts, Jeff and Sarah, and today we're welcoming Dr. Cindy Elliser from PacMam Research, Pacific Mammal Research, here to talk about the smallest cetacean in the Salish Sea, our harbor porpoises. We're really excited to have this conversation and learn a lot more about these kind of often underappreciated marine mammals.
I'm really excited about this because I know very little about harbor porpoise. We see them all the time, and I know very little. And what I do know, I question a little bit of how accurate it is because there's not a lot of information out there. And so I'm really, really excited about this conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Cindy, for joining us. We're so excited to talk about our smallest cetacean in the Salish Sea today, the harbor porpoise, often underappreciated, but should be more appreciated than it is.
100%. Thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to talk about harbor porpoises and how cool they are.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, for those of us listening that maybe are not familiar with what harbor porpoise are, can you give us kind of like just a breakdown on what are harbor porpoise?
Yeah. So, as you said, they're the smallest cetacean we have here in the Salish Sea. So they're similar to dolphins, but not dolphins. Porpoises are in different families than dolphins. So I like to start off with that. The main differences between a dolphin and a porpoise is the fact that dolphins usually have a rostrum or a beak, like their mouth, points out, most of them. But all porpoises have that blunt face, so they don't have that beak coming out. The most likely thing you'll see in the water is a dorsal fin. And the dorsal fins of porpoises are generally triangular in nature, and dolphins are more falcate or curved in nature. And then if you happen to see inside their mouths, you'd see that porpoises have spade-shaped teeth and dolphins have cone-shaped teeth. So that's more of an academic thing rather than something you'll actually get to observe. But that's one of the. And then dolphins are a bit more gregarious and in larger groups than porpoises. Porpoises are often solitary, but they're not always solitary, and they live in smaller groups, basically. But yeah, the harbor porpoises are the second smallest cetacean in the world. The only thing smaller is the critically endangered vaquita. So they are 5.5 feet, 150 pounds on average. So kind of like a average human size.
I was going to say, it pretty much matches me.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. And they are, the one fun thing about them is that they are called puffing pigs because they're kind of short and squat, and they breathe really loudly. Like sometimes when you hear them, you're like, oh, there's an orca here or something. And then you're like, oh, it's this tiny little thing.
Yeah. We had one encounter, and this was several years ago now. And it was in I think mid-December, and we got down it was off of Salmon Bank, so out kind of in, South Harrow Strait of Juan de Fuca. And we actually stopped for almost an hour with harbor porpoise because I'm not kidding. There were probably 1,000, it felt like, but they were just all around the boat. They were coming up so close, and you could just hear them so loud. And I actually took my first my selfie with a whale, but it was 4 harbor porpoise in the background. I was like, I just have to do it.
We might have to use that for the cover photo for this episode.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
But yeah, the sound of them breathing was just so loud that day. It was something that just still sticks out in my mind. Yeah,
I always like hearing marine mammals as well as seeing them. It's neat. There's just a different, it's a different thing listening versus seeing them. And then I find it's always kind of a little magical.
Yeah.
How about listening to them underwater? Have you had success with listening to them with clicks or anything like that in the water with a hydrophone?
Yeah, we haven't quite yet. We do have a hydrophone that we had out 2 different times, but we didn't. The settings weren't correct for being able to pick up those. We basically were just doing kind of soundscape analysis with that. And what we have one that we're going to start putting out. We just got the new one, so we're hoping to do that. But one of the biggest issues about that is that they are high frequency vocalizers. So their hearing range and what they say, normally we can't hear them. We cannot hear them speak. It's like a dog whistle. And so we couldn't record them until about 15, maybe 20 years ago now, the high frequency, we were able to record high frequency vocalizations and see them. So we're way behind just the royal we on their vocalizations and what they do because we just couldn't record them until more recently because they're so high pitched.
Wow, that's fascinating. So one of the things I've heard, and I'm going to ask you because you're my now expert on harbor porpoise, is I've heard that they are one of the, if not the fastest, like their hearing develops the fastest after birth of any known mammal that we know of. Have you heard that?
Oh, I think I have. I don't know too much in depth about it,
Uh-huh.
but I believe I remember that a recent study coming out with that. Like
Okay.
it was really, really quick. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's something I always kind of share with guests when we're talking about harbor porpoise because to me it's so fascinating because they are highly successful foragers, and then they're also, of course, always listening for potential predators too.
And that's why they think evolutionarily why they are so high pitched, because if you were vocalizing and your marine mammal eater, big killer whales are around, you're basically going, "Hi, I'm a mystic here, ready to eat," So if they want to go catch their prey, they need to do it without announcing their presence to the marine mammal eater.
Fascinating. And I
Yeah.
think we're actually going to be talking with a professor from the University of Washington who's done some studies on the mysticetes, like blue whales and humpback whales and all that, and looking at evolutionarily how some of them have like developed to low frequency to avoid detection by killer whales. So we're going to be talking with him next week. So that's so fascinating that they're kind of on the other end of that scale.
That's so exciting because I just saw that paper come out.
Yeah,
I'm sharing it with my students this quarter. Like it's so neat that like it goes into how their behaviors and how their physiology has evolved to different things. Like I need to eat, but I also need to not be eaten.
Yeah.
How do I do that?
Very important.
Yes, exactly.
So you have a study site kind of over by Anacortes, is that right? Burroughs Island, Burroughs Pass, that kind of area. So tell us about your study, what you're researching, how long you've been doing it. Just kind of give us an intro to that and to our listeners.
Yeah. So we moved here from my husband and I and at that point our son, we have a daughter now as well. We moved here from Florida. It was in 2014, basically. It was a little bit earlier in 2013, but so we moved here and I founded Pacific Mammal Research in 2014 because I wanted my history is social structure of dolphins in the Bahamas. That's where I was for 10 years. Yeah, before this, and I don't get sympathy for that work, of course, ever. So sorry, you were snorkeling with dolphins in the Bahamas for 10 years, and I'm so sorry for you. So my work has been photo ID, right? Looking at individuals and looking at their behavior and understanding their populations through that lens. And so when we moved here, I was very interested in if that's ever been done for porpoises in the first place, like harbor porpoises, can you do photo ID? So I did a kind of a feasibility study, found out that, spoiler alert, you can do photo ID on them. Just hasn't been tried before, really. And so in later in 2014 is when we founded PacMam, and that's the short for Pacific Mammal Research, to study harbor porpoises and harbor seals from our land-based point in Anacortes, to look at their long-term site fidelity, look at their populations through the lens of an individual to better understand their social structure, their ecology, their behavior, to inform and to be able to conserve the species.
Awesome. And what I was reading from you guys recently is that you found that there is some long-term site fidelity with these guys, that they have some, they kind of stay in the area that they were born for long periods of time.
Yeah, at least some of them do, right? So we just published our paper that basically goes over the last 11 years of photo ID, all the thousands of pictures that we've taken. And so if your listeners are familiar with, obviously familiar with orcas,
right.
We're doing the same thing as they do with the orcas, but we're doing it for porpoises. We're identifying them as individuals through different markings and pigmentation on their bodies, and then tracking them over time. And, the reason why we know so much about orcas and have the ability to know what we need to do to help them is because we know all their relationships, right?
Sure.
So we're not there yet with porpoises, but we're starting that process. But we did find is that very few studies have looked at harbor porpoises in this way at the local scale. Like a lot of the times it's just like abundance or distribution or, what things are happening there. We were able to do is we're at this one study site. So as they come back, we know their porpoises are there year round. So that was one of the big things about going to that particular site. We can go there, we know they're there. And luckily they come close enough to the shore with my big long lens to be able to get pictures of them. But what we found is that there's a local population here. We have individuals that have up to 11 years of site fidelity, like regular site fidelity that we see all the time. Wow. We have an individual we've seen over 125 times over the last 7-8 years.
Wow.
Yeah, her name is Pointer. She's our poster child. She's beautiful. And yeah, and we did find that we can't always track the calves, because if we don't get good enough pictures, or they don't have good enough markings, we may not, we lose them after they leave mom. But we do know of a few calves that have stayed for at least 5 years after being born, and they come back to this area as well. So wow. Yeah, it's as far as we know, there's only one other place in the world that has the same type of data, and that's over in the Netherlands. And they have an individual that they've seen at least for 14 years.
Wow, wow. And what's their average lifespan? Do we know?
So that's a great question. I love when people ask that question, because I'm like, so the estimate is anywhere between 8 and 24 years.
Okay, all right. So a little bit of a span there.
They don't know, yeah.
But studies like yours may help in the future to kind of answer that question. So that's really cool.
Right. So, and actually we do in the paper at the end, we actually talk about that, because we have found we have individuals that are at least 10 and 14 years old that are still having calves.
Oh, okay.
So if that's a normal thing, right? It's a small sample, but if that's a normal thing, then 8 years old is a really low ball estimate for their age for an otherwise healthy population, right? If you have 14-year-olds that are still having babies.
Right.
So we think that this, pushes that towards like, hey, I think the 8 is too low for the average. One of the biggest things for the lifespan is that they live about half as long as dolphins. So they do have a faster life history than dolphins.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're getting a lot of great information about site fidelity. Do you have any info about how far away they may range, and how far, like, have you gotten individual IDs of specific individuals who show up really far away, or any measurable distance away?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And for the most part, no. Like, that's one of the things, like, where do they go when they're not here? I'm like, that's a great question. I don't know. Because we just don't, people aren't out taking photos, and they are very hard to take pictures of, right? And when I first started this, I would tell people what I was starting to do, and they would literally start laughing. Like, they're like, that's what, oh, wait, what? Because, I mean, if everybody's had experience, it is difficult. But you can do it. It just takes some time and patience. But because of that, they're hard, and people have kind of ignored them too for a long time. We just don't have a lot of data from around the Salish Sea, and that's why we do have some people sending in photos now that are going to be usable for ID. But we haven't had any matches yet, except for we had one from a whale watching company, which was up in the southern San Juan, so it wasn't too far.
Uh-huh.
And then the most exciting one was recently we had somebody that was out that posted, they were out, I think, down by Deception Pass. And they had posted some pictures, and some more of our followers was like, oh, hey, do you know this animal? And it turns out we did. It was Raindrop, who is one of our regulars. She's 10 years old, is having calves. We see her all the time. And so she was down by Deception Pass.
Oh,
so they at least go that far.
Yeah.
Very
they
cool.
have smaller ranges than people give them credit for.
And are you looking mostly at dorsal fin shape? What are the markings that you're looking at?
Yeah, so for most small cetaceans, you use the dorsal fin, nicks and notches in the dorsal fin, like, because bottlenose dolphins in particular just, I guess, beat each other up. I don't really know exactly how they get all the notches, but they do. But so porpoises don't, and their dorsal fins are really small. So for our main primary markers are actually the pigmentation patterns that go along the side. So where the dark they're a little bit darker on top and lighter at the bottom, that counter shading, that line of that pigmentation is individually unique.
Wow. Okay.
And they've known that since the 70s.
All right.
But that was from stranded individuals, right? And then nobody decided to take that on to try. And also, you really couldn't do it until you had digital photography, because only 30% of the, roughly like 30% of the photos that we take are usable. So you'd be paying for
a lot of development. Yeah.
I'm just amazed because the photography of getting a good photo of a harbor porpoise is so difficult. It's so challenging.
They're so fast.
Yeah.
And they're very erratic. That's the part that bugs me the most. So they'll, you need them to surface and go, okay, I see you. And now I get my camera trained where that is. And you come again. And then I take your picture. And this is fantastic. But they're like, just kidding. And they'll be like 20 feet in the opposite direction where they were. So it can be very trying. But so that pigmentation mark. And then also they do have scars and lesions, which are very helpful. I mean, unfortunate for them, but they do get them. And then the dorsal fin shape, though, we do use, and this is one of the most fascinating things personally that I've noticed, is that even though we can't use the dorsal fin shape necessarily as a standalone marker unless the dorsal fin's like chopped off or something. I mean, that's obviously very weird shape. But the shapes that they have, we can categorize into about 5 different categories of, basic shape. And then even within the individuals, I mean, I see these pictures so often, sometimes I can look and go, oh, that's pointer's dorsal fin, even though it's not really distinct, but it is when you look at them a lot. Oh. But the shapes are unique within the individuals. It's just how much, mm-hmm. that you can. So we use it to help confirm our IDs.
This is so cool.
The pigmentation,
yeah.
How many? I'm sorry if you've mentioned this already.
Mm-hmm.
How many individuals do you have identified?
We have almost 200 identified now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And so some of those we've seen once, some of them we've seen quite a few times. It's a range of individuals, but, the resightings that we have are probably vast underestimates of it, because a lot of the times we're like, well, the porpoises were here, but you were over like far away on the other side of the pass and I couldn't get a picture of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's likely that we're seeing them more often than we think, where we can document, simply because we can't get all the photos.
And that's just from one small area. So
right.
I mean, I'm just thinking of like how many harbor porpoise might be out here, like in the Salish Sea, just from that.
And the last aerial survey that was done in 2015, 2016, they estimated 11,000, a little over 11,000 in the U.S. waters of the Salish Sea alone. So that doesn't include Canada.
That's amazing.
And are we seeing, like, over the, now 11 years that you've been doing this, have you seen, like, kind of a general population trend in the greater area? Like, I feel like when I first started many, many, many years ago, I didn't see them as much, and now I'm seeing more harbor porpoise. I'm actually seeing, like, less Dall's porpoise than I used to, or I feel like I am. But have you noticed, or are you aware of any kind of general population trends in the region?
Yeah, so their story is interesting, and I'm glad you brought up the Dalls, because let's go back in history.
Yeah.
Like a timeline. In the 40s and 50s, harbor porpoises were everywhere, and you saw very few Dall's porpoises. And then by the early 1990s, harbor porpoises were all but gone, and particularly in the South Puget, like Puget Sound in the South, they were gone, basically. They were fewer up here in the San Juan area and northern waters, and you saw tons of Dalls.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the early 2000s, it swapped again. So now we have harbor porpoises everywhere, and you rarely see Dalls. And so it's interesting when you talk to somebody who's been on the water a lot, if they were out there in the 80s and 90s, they're going to tell you that what you see out there is Dalls porpoises.
Right.
But if you see somebody now, you're going to say, no, it's harbor porpoises.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 100% correct. But we don't really know why that occurs, right? They have... they overlap in their diet, like they eat a lot of the same things,
mm-hmm.
but Dalls tend to like deeper waters, and harbor, as in their name, harbor, are closer to shore generally.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but why they both can't live and hang out at the same time, I don't know.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I've heard stories about from people who've been whale watching for 20 or 30 years out here, saying that there used to be so many Dalls porpoise and now there aren't, but there are so many harbor porpoise now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's 100% true. We don't know why the decline and recovery occurred, because nobody's been looking at either of those porpoises. And we know probably even less about Dalls porpoises than we do harbor porpoises at this point, because it's just, it's harder to study since there's fewer of them. And so, but it's likely combinations of the habitat degradation is getting better because we're more cognizant of what we're doing on the shorelines. Gill nets aren't really nearly as much of a problem as they used to be. Pollution, we are getting better, even though it's still not great. Like, those things are better. So that combination probably hurt them earlier, and now that it's getting better, it allowed them to come back to their normal range. So
Yeah. I grew up kind of down in Puget Sound, in Suquamish. And when I was down there, we rarely saw harbor porpoise. Like when I went down to like kind of the pier down in Suquamish, if I saw a harbor porpoise, I got really, really excited. And I see so many reports now, like I could probably like look on a daily basis of people seeing like massive groups of harbor porpoise down near Suquamish now. And I'm just like, oh man, that's so cool that they've come back, that they're so much more prevalent down there now than they were when I was growing up down there.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, and you're mentioning before that sighting that you had where you had like, at least hundreds, if not more, harbor porpoises. And again, so their average group size is 2 to 3, usually less than 3. And it's not uncommon to see them by themselves, which is not true for dolphin species, right? So they've gotten this kind of misnomer that they aren't social or they don't have social structure or what, for other reasons as well. But what we've been finding is that people being out on, especially the whale watching community, there's large aggregations that happen, and it is much more common than we thought. And so we worked with our colleague Dave Anderson down in the South Sound with Cascadia Research Collective, and then worked with the Pacific Whale Watch Association with their data, because you guys are out in the water all the time, more than we can be, and collated that data and looking at specifically aggregations of 20 or more. And we saw them throughout the year. And for example, to show you how prevalent they are, there was 160 in 2022 alone.
Wow.
So they're going together and having big parties.
Yeah.
Exactly why, we still don't know for sure, but they do socialize a bit more during that time. And so it's just fascinating to continually find out all this new information for animals that are everywhere, and we still just know nothing about them.
Yeah.
So interesting.
And I do feel like there's specific areas kind of in the northern San Juan Islands where, if you're going to go out looking for harbor porpoise, you're more likely to see those big groups. Kind of like I sent you that photo. Yeah, the photo from the other day, Cindy, of the 3, which I was super excited to just get 3 in a photo at once. But
me too. When I get a group,
yeah. I was like telling the passengers all about how excited I was. Yeah, kind of up there, like. Yeah, in Boundary Pass and then up by Peytos. There's a few places where, like, if I'm going to see harbor porpoise, I kind of expect a bigger group of them. But then they always surprise me, too, by kind of having a big group somewhere else that I don't expect.
Well, it's always cool when you can get a big group and you can just shut down and just drift for a while and actually get good looks. Yeah. It doesn't happen a lot, but it when it does, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually had that. I took my marine mammal class out on the water a couple weeks ago, and we bumped into basically, not literally, but like 20 to 25 harbor porpoises. And you just drift. You turn off the engine, you drift, and they don't care about the boats as much when it's just drifting. They surface quite close, and it is magical. It's just to be surrounded basically by them. It's just really neat. And so that's another thing that we talk about with Dave. Down in the South Sound, is in a lot of places they are known to be evading of boats, right? They are evasive, shy. That's why research has been hard on them. But I think here in the Salish Sea, they are so used to boat traffic that they're not as averse as other populations are.
Yeah.
Particularly if you just shut down and just hang there. If you're not bothering them, they're going to be like, okay, I'm going to continue to do my thing and you can watch me.
Yeah. Actually, I had this amazing experience last year. I was Alex was driving the boat. And so I unfortunately didn't have my camera up, but we were kind of up over by Sydney, BC, and a ferry came through, and the wake it through was huge. Like, it was just this huge rolling wave next to us, and the water was so clear that day, and there were 3 harbor porpoise in the wake, and you could see them like up above the surface in this like rolling wake. Wow. Just swimming underwater, but like they were right next to the boat, and I was screaming. I was like, ah, like, it's so cool. Alex and I were both freaking out. The passengers thought it was like the best thing they'd seen. So
I love hearing that when passengers also appreciate it, because it doesn't always happen with like, it's not a whale, But the interesting you mentioned the wake, because they do wake ride. But just not, maybe as often as others. And I like to say that they do it differently. So like dolphins will ride the wake as you go, like they follow the boat and jump for the wake, whatever. But the porpoises do something different. The boat will come through the path, at least particularly in our area. They'll go through but the boat will be pretty much gone through it, and then they're like, and they try it a couple weeks, and then they go back to eating or whatever they were doing. So it's easier to miss, I think, but they do it more often than we think.
Cool.
Interesting.
Is there a certain time of year for like calving, breeding? Like, is there a season? Or are they doing it all year round? Like, just trying to learn as much as I can.
Yeah. So both. They have a season, right? So calves are normally born late August, early September. So late summer, early spring. So that's definitely the calving season. But they mate year round. So they they are a sperm. We believe they're sperm competition. So their testes get quite large, but they're doing it the entire time when they're not actually conceiving.
Right.
And some of that, I think, has to do with the fact that they have to practice. Do you know how harbor porpoises mate? Have you seen the pictures?
I've seen them breaching, yes, but they're very impressive physiology.
I don't know this. Let's hear about this.
Oh, okay. Well, so I'll try to be as PC or PG as possible. But males are very well endowed. So their thing comes up to basically their chin, very large. And so they don't always go aerial, but they often will go aerial when they mate. And so it's really interesting. And this is information that we've learned along mainly from our colleagues down at the Golden Gate Bridge, where they've done a lot of research on harbor porpoises and particularly the mating behavior. The males will come up on the left-hand side of the female 100% of the time.
Wow.
Which is very rare in nature to have that kind of lateralization. Always, right? And we've documented this we did a chapter in the Sex and Cetaceans book and looked at worldwide. Like we got pictures and confirmations from people around the world that this is a species-wide thing, not just a here thing or Pacific thing or whatever. So they will come up on the left-hand side of the female and leap out of the water. The female will often cartwheel away. So her fluke will go up and basically like a cartwheel in the water, and he then lands, and then they swim off and they do whatever they do. But it's about a second. So if you blink, you'll miss it. Like a lot of times you'll just see the splash. Very quick. And they think that we have another colleague that does internal molds of genitalia. And so I always joke about if she had to take those stuff on a plane or something, be like, fine, everything's okay here. But the analysis that she did with that is that it basically looks like that's exactly the best way for it to fit. Like that left-handed approach. And the male member is also slightly canted to the left. So it hooks in. The females have a lot of vaginal folds. I think it's the most in any mammal species.
Wow.
If not, it's very close. And we think that to some degree that's a level of a co-evolutionary arms race, right? The female is you can't get in. The male's I'm going to do this. And then the female's no, I'm going to do this. The male's going to do that. So this evolutionary arms race of genitalia. And then so that's just how it meets up. And the folds we think the reaction of the female can to some degree be if I just tilt my fluke a little bit to the left or the right or whatever, it'll go into this one fold if she didn't like that male or didn't.
Oh, interesting.
So maybe there's some female choice happening, or at least some level of it.
Yeah, when you said that they 100% approach from the left, my question was going to be is there something in their anatomy that makes that's fascinating, so fascinating?
Yeah, and so it's and we've all this is a good one to highlight how underrepresented harbor porpoises have been, because they've been around for forever. Only in it was 2017, 2018 when we learned that they literally fly out of the water to mate. How have we missed that?
Yeah, right.
We haven't been looking. So that's basically it.
Do we know what the gestation is?
Yeah, so it's about 10 to 11 months.
Okay.
So they will get pregnant basically late summer and then have the baby around that time the next year. We saw a neonate as early as May one year, but that was pretty unusual.
Wow. And how small are they when they're born?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have the number, but they're got to be they're 2-ish feet. They're only 5.5 feet to begin with.
Right.
So less than half at least. Yeah.
Oh, so cute.
But they're super cute.
Yeah.
They're really cute.
Yeah. I'm going to be looking out now.
Yeah.
Late August and September.
So if you see a porpoise leaping, now they will leap for other reasons. And porpoising sometimes gets really high and whatever. But if you have full aerial out of the water,
probably
it gets probably you just saw mating attempts. Yeah.
And I have
Like,
very rare, but I have seen that once or twice. I have seen that, but had no idea what I was looking at.
Well, and that's the fun story is that like I had pictures of them partly out of the water and whatnot, and then we went to the Marine Mammal Conference that was in San Francisco, and so the Golden Gate researchers we had a workshop on harbor porpoises, and so that's when we learned about this behavior. And then I was like, click, oh my God, I have pictures of that. I just didn't know what I was looking at. I just was excited because I got them out of the air,
Right.
But I realized like, oh my God, that's a mating attempt, and then and then we got more and more and more, but. And obvious ones that we definitely know what's happening.
That's not kelp.
But, yeah, nope. I'll tell you a story. One fun sighting. Yeah. The one of the first best pictures that I have. It's not necessarily a best picture of mating because you only see the male in the picture, but it was the first time I had seen the thing. I was taking pictures and I just happened to be in the right spot, and he leapt, and so I was so excited. My assistant was there, and I was like, oh my God, I got the aerial. I got him out of the water. I mean, full, like completely,
wow,
like freewheeling out of the water, like literally freewheeling. Sorry. You see the picture, but then I zoomed in and I was like, oh my God, this whole thing was out, and it was very impressive.
Yeah, I know. The first time I saw a photo of that, I was just like, oh my gosh, they are literally hitting their chin.
Impressive.
Well, if you want to share that photo, we'll put it in the show notes. Maybe we'll do a little
absolutely
warning, but
yeah,
warning.
I think it's cool. It's just physiology.
It's biology. I mean, it is what it is. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But it's always good to warn people just in case, because not everybody wants to see that.
Yes.
I think it's fascinating.
What are some? I'm learning so much info that we can share in our tours now about harbor porpoise. What are some other fun and cool things that we should be sharing with people, so that they can learn more about them?
Yeah. So because they live shorter lives, right? The whole point of life is to pass on your genes. So you have to start doing that faster if you're only living to 25 years, and of course, if you're only living to 8 years, you better start real quick.
Right.
So they will start having calves as young as 3 to 4 years of age. So they become sexually. And so that's how we estimated the age of the individuals that we have. We know they were adults when we saw them, and then add on 3 years. That gives us the age. It could be older, right? So that's kind of cool. So females. Okay, I'm going to just see which one do I want to say first. Okay, so they can calve yearly. So they either have calves yearly or bi-yearly, so every other year, depending on the location. Oh. And it was thought that the Atlantic was yearly and the Pacific was bi-yearly based on past data. But what we saw, we have individuals that had new calves every year for at least 3 years. So they can calve yearly. And that is supported by stranding data, who suggested that they could calve yearly based on, what they saw in the uteruses of the ones that they did necropsies on. Mm-hmm. But they couldn't say for sure, right? So the two information together is like, okay, they can definitely calve yearly in the Salish Sea. Now, whether that's the same along the Pacific, we don't know. But at least here in the Salish Sea, they can. So that leads me to the fact that harbor porpoise females, I think, are the most badass things in the world. Because they can be lactating and pregnant every year of their adult life.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, I've been pregnant twice, but at separate, not at the same, not crossing over, and that was enough,
Yeah, that's a really big toll on the body, and then having to feed yourself and oh my gosh, that's impressive.
So and on that, with how much food you need, right? It takes, especially lactation. Lactation takes even more than pregnancy does, which always kind of blows my mind.
Yeah.
But lactating porpoises need 105% more energy than a non-reproductively active female. And they're already kind of living life on the edge because they're really small. They live in cold waters. They have a really high metabolism. Mm-hmm. So in some studies have seen that they basically have to constantly eat. They need predictable food sources because they have to eat all the time to keep up. They're mainly eating small things, small forage fish, like sand lance and herring, and then hake and things like that, less than 12 inches. And so that you're gonna have to eat a lot. Yeah, that's a lot of work to collect all those fish for that. And that kind of led to another thing that we started noticing just because we're out there watching, that we saw them actually catching salmon.
Mm.
Wow.
And the first picture that we got was a colleague that was out taking photos in the summer, and she sent it to me, and I was like, I don't think you can eat that, sir or ma'am, whatever. Like, it's huge. And they eat it head first. I mean, they eat everything, they swallow it whole, right, and they eat it first. But the picture is literally with the salmon sideways like a dog bone in the mouth.
Fascinating.
Wow.
And I was like, what are you doing? At first I was like, okay, that's just some weirdo was doing something funny and I don't know. But then I thought about it more and I'm like, I think this really needs to be put out. Like, is this something else that happens everywhere, right? So, and then we started getting more pictures and observing behavior of them chasing the larger fish at the surface, which is different from what it looks like when they're chasing smaller fish below. And so then we reached out to our colleagues at Golden Gate and we're like, have you seen this? And they're like, actually, we have. They see it with American shad, which is an introduced species into Colombia about 50, 60 years ago. And what we found, we were like, how often, so we documented that, right, that they are catching large fish. We have multiple examples of it. And here, when we've been able to ID the fish, it's been coho. There's a couple times that we've been able to ID the fish, but we don't know, beyond that. In September, I think it was September, there was a coho run, and we saw them doing it a whole bunch this past year.
Wow.
But so we documented that they're taking these large fish, which it can be up to half their body length, right? Adult salmon can get up to 2 feet long.
Yeah, just thinking about that is crazy.
Yeah. So my first question was, can you choke on that? Because it seems like you could.
Yeah.
Right? It's so big. So that led to the next thing of like, well, let's ask the stranding people. Like, have you guys seen this kind of weird, they've been found choking on these larger fish? And usually if something like that happens, it gets put on a note, put out in the literature. Like, hey, this weird animal showed up with this thing stuck in its throat, and wow, that's weird. There we found 27 cases over the last 30, 40 years that had never been published or documented. Wow. And again, it goes again into like they've just been kind of ignored. So we worked with the Stranding Network from Oregon, Washington, I think Northern California, and looked at who it was. And this goes back to the reproductive active females, is that 92% of them were females and up to 87% of them are reproductively active.
Wow. Well, I mean, bigger bang for your buck, but it's, potentially risky, right? Bigger risk, but
you could catch one instead of 300 small fish.
Right.
Seems good. But you are now possibly taking out a fetus and a calf.
Right.
If the mother dies. So.
Yeah, that makes me think of that. I'm sure you heard of it too. That the orca that washed ashore up in the Aleutians, I think was maybe a couple years ago, that had the sea otter stuck in the throat and asphyxiated with, a sea otter in the throat, and then like 6 more fully intact in the stomach that she had swallowed whole.
Yeah, I was like, he was really good at it until he wasn't.
Until he wasn't. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it only takes a little bit because their esophagus and trachea are like basically kind of like on top of each other. The esophagus goes down. If it pushes enough, it pops the goose beak out of place, which is what connects the blowhole to the trachea. So that gets popped out and you can't get it out. That's it. Yeah.
So interesting. I'm thinking about this in a bigger picture, that cetaceans all over the world, they can be big risk takers when it comes to going after prey.
Yeah.
In different ways.
Mm-hmm. You seen the bottlenose dolphin that died with the octopus in its mouth, and the worm was all the way in the throat?
Yeah.
That was in Australia, I think.
Just fascinating.
But we were wondering, like, so it's salmon up here. The American shad, and that's the other part of that story, is that almost all of the fish that they were able to identify were American shad that they were choking on.
Huh.
But that was more along the coast. It wasn't within the Salish Sea, from the records that we had. But is it something that like they just don't know that they shouldn't eat that, but they're trying because there are so many? Like American shad is outnumbering all the salmon runs at certain locations, like in the Columbia, and nobody's talking about them, which also blows my mind. Like this is a huge issue to salmon survival.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about it. So
introduce species, ma'am.
I know, right? Yeah. Like this is gonna be great. Everybody's gonna eat them. Oh, nobody's eating them. Oh no. Oh.
Yeah. So it sounds like for harbor porpoise, like to really like think about kind of a bigger picture, broader conservation picture is like looking at kind of shoreline, like rehabilitation and like forage fish is like the big thing for their continued survival and population.
It always goes back
Yeah.
to forage
Building.
fish.
Yeah, the building block
Yeah.
of our food web.
Yeah, and it's really important to remember too that harbor porpoises, like everything's on a like can be on a very fine spatial and temporal scale. So how they use a particular area may vary drastically depending on the tide, the hour of the day, the season, and even within an area. So there's in our area, we found they don't like ebb tide. They basically travel through. They don't stay and hang out during ebb tide.
Interesting.
In our study area, also in winter. But so that's unique to that area. But then in other locations, you may have something completely different. In some of the studies we referenced, there was one that had, two locations that were fairly close, and they did opposite things during flood tide in each place, right? They foraged in the flood tide in this place, but they did something else, during that in the other place, but on small spatial scales. So you can't blanket harbor porpoise and say the Salish Sea does this, right? No. And we need to have more fine scale.
That's so fascinating.
This is all
Yeah.
most of this is brand new info for us.
Yeah. I love it.
Well, I mean, it's brand new information for porpoises in general, right? That's what's so exciting, is being able to present this information that we just never knew.
Yeah. Well, where can people find out more information from your research organization? I've followed you guys for years, but recently found you on Blue Sky. We're going to link to all of these as well. But if there's somewhere you prefer people to reach out to or look you up on, what would that be?
So we're on Instagram and Facebook and Blue Sky now. We have a YouTube channel as well that we'll be posting. We just have recently started getting drone footage, which has been, oh my God, it's amazing. We've gotten some very spectacular mating attempts
cool.
on camera, so check those out.
Yeah, we'll link to those.
Absolutely.
And so we have the YouTube channel that we'll be updating with more drone footage and stuff as well. And then just to reach out, we have our website is pacmam.org, and there's an info email that you can send out, and we're always happy to chat and talk. So if there's anything anybody wants to know,
awesome.
And we have publications on there as well on the webpage, so you can always access the scientific publications there. And I will plug that we will be adding to it. We're trying to do a little bit more science communication, and I have a student that wrote poems based on our abstracts.
Oh, cool.
And it's really neat to see. She captures the scientific stuff in there, but in an emotional way, and
I love that.
Really neat.
I love this.
We're gonna be
intersection of like art and science. I think it's going to take all disciplines to like accomplish broadly what we want to do, and I just love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's so that will be up in the near future with amongst all the other things that we have to do.
Sweet.
That's one thing on the plate.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Cindy. It's been such a pleasure having you on, and I hope that we can have you back on again to talk more about these guys, because it's just so fascinating.
Well, like I said, I will talk all the time about porpoises. So
sweet.
Reach out and I'm on there.
We look forward to it. All right. Well, what a great conversation with Cindy. That was amazing.
It was really cool. I learned so much and have a whole new appreciation. And I mean, the challenge this year, I want to get ID photos, and I want to send it to her and have, like, I want to get one from Strait of Georgia and have her be like, oh, that's so-and-so. I didn't know that they would go that far. But I mean, forget about that. I just want to get a good photo of a harbor porpoise, because that ain't easy.
No, it's so not easy. I know we sent her one when we were setting up this podcast recording of one I got the other week of 3 in the photo, and I was super stoked. And I think like 1's in focus, but it was still like best harbor porpoise photo I've had in years.
I might have to ride along on some of Alan's trips, because he seems
the porpoise king.
The porpoise king. They seem to gravitate towards him. I think he's some kind of god or something to that. Yeah,
well, such a great conversation. I look forward to talking to her more about harbor seals. So We're going to have Cindy back on soon to talk about harbor seals. I know this is after the breach, but everything's connected, and harbor seals are such an important part of our food web here, both as predators and as prey. And there's been some kind of recent developments around pinnipeds. They're always kind of at risk, and we like to promote them and talk about how important they are to the ecosystem. Especially here in the Salish Sea.
Yeah, that'll be a great episode as well. We've got lots of cool episodes coming up.
Yeah.
And so, I think this is just the beginning of a great year for our podcast. So I'm very excited.
Yeah. Well, we are back out on the water every day. In fact, I raced over here from a trip today. We had 16 killer whales, 2 different groups. It was really amazing. We'll talk about that.
We've been having lots of days of multiple groups of killer whales. I mean, they've really been dominating the tours for much of the month of March.
Yeah.
Which is very cool. And we're going to do an episode.
The March recap,
and talk about all the different groups that we've been seeing, the different behaviors, and excited about that too. But yeah, come out on the water with us.
Yeah. And then we have our upcoming workshop, our podcast weekend trip, our 2 all-day trips, Saturday and Sunday. That's May 17th and 18th.
Got it right this time.
Sweet. Okay, May 17th and 18th. We do have some seats left on that. We would love to have you out. We cater lunch. We have a lot of fun. We count and see how many whales we can find on that weekend. It's
donuts. We have donuts.
So shoot us an email. Reach out to us if you'd like to join us for that. We would love to have you. We'd love to have you regardless. So come on out for a 4-hour tour with Maya's Legacy. Let us know that let us know that you're a podcast listener, and
share this and leave us reviews and send us emails with any questions or topic or guest suggestions. It's afterthebreachpodcast@gmail.com. And just remember, everyone, really important, stay safe out there.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of After the Breach podcast. If you've enjoyed it and want to help us out, please share this with your friends, family, and any other whale-loving folks you can think of. We would also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have topics you're interested in and would like to hear on the show, please send us an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can find us on Instagram as @AfterTheBreach and on Facebook as After the Breach Podcast. And if you'd like to go whale watching with us, then come on up to San Juan Island, Washington State. We run tours with Maya's Legacy Whale Watching, departing just steps away from the ferry landing in beautiful downtown Friday Harbor. It's a great destination for a day trip or multiple days and offers some of the best whale and wildlife viewing in the world. We would love to take you out on the water to see the amazing whales we talk about on our podcast. You can book a tour through the company website at www.sjiwhalewatch.com and make sure to mention you're a podcast listener when you book. Thanks again for listening, and remember, stay safe out there.